Hello, everyone. This is Zoe speaking. We're just hitting a minute after 7, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started with a few things before I get into the presentation. I know some people tend to hop on a little bit later than 7, but like I said, hello, my name is Zoe. I am the Adult Programming and Community Outreach Librarian at Tredyffrin Public Library. Thank you for joining me tonight as we discuss fake news, or as I like to call it, disingenuous news. Tonight, our goal is to cover what fake news is, how to identify it, and ways you can avoid it. I have emailed those who pre-registered a PDF version of this presentation. If you have not received it, let me know, and I would be happy to send it your way. I do want to inform everyone that I am recording this presentation, and it will be made available on the library's YouTube channel within a couple of days. And let me know if you have any issues with audio or anything like that. You can just pop it in the chat, or you can ask it in the Q&A function on the webinar. And then please let me know if I'm going too fast or to speed up, whichever you prefer, just let me know. I tend to go fast, I'm a fast talker, so just let me know. First, before we go ahead and jump into the presentation, I want to acknowledge that this is a politically charged topic. This webinar is an opportunity for education and civic dialogue in an unbiased conversation. We all know that there are a variety of viewpoints in the Zoom, and that's a good thing, but please keep chat and questions as unbiased as possible. My goal is to inform you on how to spot news that is disingenuous or any news that provides misinformation or disinformation, and to teach you skills on fact-checking and how to evaluate news. With that being said, please type any questions or comments throughout the presentation or throughout the discussion, either in the chat or the Q&A function. I will try my best to answer and address any questions along the way. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. First and foremost, what is fake news? Boiling it down to its bare bones, fake news is essentially false information spread with a deliberate attempt to mislead, especially for financial or political gain. So there are 4 distinct categories of fake news, which include pure fake news, which is 100% fictional or false information; misleading news, manipulated information, or information provided out of context with the intent to confuse or mislead consumers; biased news, information that is presented with an ideological slant; and finally, satirical news, humorous or sardonic information. Think of The Onion or any other satirical piece of work. You will stumble on these articles or websites more on social media like Facebook or Twitter. There are 5 major red flags to look for when consuming any news, either by reading, watching, or listening. The first red flag is you cannot verify the claims within the article or story. The second red flag is there is an appeal to or evocation of emotions, both positive and negative. I know when people tend to speak about fake news, they jump to negative emotions, but it can also appeal to positive emotions as well. The third red flag is authors are not experts in the topic or subject matter, or they're not actual journalists. They haven't, worked in journalism. They haven't studied to be a journalist. The fourth red flag is that information within the story cannot be found anywhere else, as in covered by other reputable news sources. And 5, the information came from a disingenuous website or a fraudulent news source. If the news story you are consuming has any or all of these red flags, then it is without a doubt disingenuous news or fake news. So the question remains, how do you avoid fake news? I have 7 tips that will help you evaluate all of the news you consume on a daily basis. These are questions you should be asking yourself or thoughts you should have about any news story, regardless of the source. The first tip I have is to read past the headline. Don't fall for clickbait. Most headlines mislead readers into thinking they get the whole idea or that the story went a certain way and not the other. Even reputable sources do this. Always read the entire article before assuming you understand the entire story. And then I just want to remind anyone who just joined us before or just after I started, I did email out the PDF of the presentation we're looking at, and I just want to kindly remind everyone to keep the chat and the Q&A as unbiased as possible. I understand this is a politically charged topic, but our goal today is to talk about it in an unbiased way and to give you tools on how to best evaluate the news you consume. So I think I was on the second tip. Check credentials, investigate the author and news source, read the about pages of the author and the news source itself. What do those pages tell you about the author's credentials and experience, and also about the mission of the news source itself. Any reputable news source like the New York Times or NPR will always have an about page that'll talk about its history and its mission and vision statement. And all of the authors who provide content for reputable news sources will have their own kind of profile page where you can look at their credentials and their history and experience within journalism itself. Number 3, look for a bias. How does the article or news source lean? Is it left, right, or neutral? 4, check the sources. Read the cited articles and additional information. Reputable news sources will provide links to anything they might cite, like studies, interviews, or other articles. Click those links and read through that information too. 5, check the dates. Make sure the article is up to date and accurate. Information and news can expire much like milk and eggs. This stands so true for disasters, emergencies, and traumatic events. They change minute to minute or even second by second, and so should the news coverage. And this can even be true for the upcoming election. As we all know, the election changes second by second, minute by minute during the day, and so should the coverage of the election. 6, consider promotions. Is the purpose of the article or news source to sell you something? If the answer is yes, then it is most likely fake or disingenuous news. Their only goal is to make you buy something from them, not to give you information. And finally, number 7, make a judgment call. If you feel a strong emotion either way, or if you find yourself thinking it's too good to be true, it most likely is. The primary purpose of news is to provide readers or consumers with information, not to make you feel any sort of strong emotion either way, and this can range from ecstasy to pure outrage. The best tip I can give anyone, especially to anyone who may have attended college, always evaluate your news articles like you would evaluate scholarly articles. Do we have any questions so far about what fake news is and some of the major red flags? So I'm going to go over some more tips and tricks and also some 2 important kind of like vocabulary words that I'm sure you've heard recently or you've come across at some point in your life. Be aware of the filter bubble. What is the filter bubble, you might ask? The filter bubble is when search results, news feeds, and social medias are personalized by internet algorithms. What you see is how you align. You won't see any opposing or differing views. So what's the big deal? The problem is that the filter bubble can lead to confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when consumers favor information that supports what you already believe. You do not seek out the opposing views or other points of view. It is human nature and everyone does it. But addressing your confirmation bias and popping your filter bubble can help you become smarter consumers of news. And I also provided a handy little picture here of kind of to visualize what confirmation bias is. So you can see that the two triangles assume that all squares are blue because the only two triangles that they can see are blue. But if you look at the wider picture, you can see that there is an array of colors of squares. So with the triangles assuming that all squares are blue, they're giving into their confirmation bias. But if they popped their filter bubble and looked further or broadened their horizon, they would see that there's a little bit more to the story than just the blue squares. So I wanted to provide some sort of diagram or graphic to help you kind of understand what the filter bubble might look like or how it can affect your consumption of news. And here is a graphic to help depict the filter bubble itself and confirmation bias. Most of us get our news via Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or some other major social media platform. While sources like the New York Times, CBS, and NPR may be providing that information, your social media will filter it based on your viewpoints, mostly how you lean politically. Over time, the algorithm will adjust so that all you will ever see are news stories that lean the way you do politically. We have someone asking in the chat, how can you get out of the filter bubble? I will, in a couple of slides, talk about how you can pop your filter bubble and step out and look for a wider selection of viewpoints. So where was I? Over time, the algorithm will adjust so that all you will ever see on your social media platforms are news stories that lean the way you do politically. It is okay to get news sources that lean right or left, but it is even more important to seek out information from sources that might differ from your point of view, and you should consume news from additional sources that back up the claims in the original story you came across. You cannot consume news from only one source anymore. You have to shop around to get the entire story and to see as many viewpoints as you possibly can. And then here's just another graphic of the filter bubble. This is an example of how algorithms make it so that you will only ever see posts and news stories that affirm your viewpoints and political leanings. So you can see here, your feed is kind of protected by that hypothetical bubble. So you only ever see brands, facts, news, or sources that align with your viewpoints, and everything that would break your confirmation bias or that is outside of your filter bubble is literally outside. It's within hand's reach, but the algorithms make it difficult for you to get there. We also have someone asking, how do you get out of the bubble? And then someone asks, are there any organizations that review the accuracy of major news sources? Yes, I will go over resources towards the end that will give you some sources or some resources that can help you evaluate major news sources. So this is to answer that question of how do you get out of your filter bubble? One way to pop your filter bubble is by purposefully reading across the media bias spectrum. You heard it here first, folks. Unbiased news does not exist. As I mentioned earlier, it is okay to first consume news from a left or right-leaning source, but it is so much more important to consume the same news story from other viewpoints across the spectrum. Use the All Sides handy media chart to find sources across the spectrum to help with fact-checking and stepping out of your filter bubble. You can see the spectrum larger on their website at www.allsides.com. So this is kind of just a general image here. They are constantly updating it, and there is another graphic that's kind of floating around on the internet. I don't think it was produced by All Sides, but it is much larger and it includes other sources, but these are our major ones here. So let's say you came across a news story on NPR. The way to kind of like step out of your filter bubble is to read an article, say like by the CNN, and then also by like New York Post, so that you can kind of see both left and right, and it's across the spectrum, and you're seeing if the facts are the same across the entire spectrum. If the facts aren't, you can't find the facts across all of the major news sources, like CNN is reporting something different than NPR, than Fox News, then you know there might be something up with the story. Either it is actual disingenuous news and it's not a story that you should, you know, believe in its entirety, or it's just something that is currently unfolding and that they have not gotten all of their facts correct yet. And it's just not up to date with what's currently going on. Do we have any other questions? I know the filter bubble and confirmation bias are kind of like newer concepts, or concepts that you may have heard and you just, you know, no one really took the time to kind of explain what they were. So please let me know if you need any clarification or have any questions about those ideas. Whoops. Most importantly, when it comes to consuming news, practice makes perfect. Fact check and critically consume every piece of news you come across. It may seem like a lot of work, but like with exercising, you just have to learn to use this muscle and it'll be a piece of cake in no time. It is always worth the time you put into fact check every news piece you come across. We should all be fully informed citizens, and that job is our own responsibility. I'd rather have spent 30 minutes fact-checking a news article and learned that it's not entirely factual than spend 5 minutes reading the article and and assuming it's correct and aid in spreading misinformation. And I hope you would agree. I know it may seem like a lot of work right now, but like I said, it's just like stretching your muscles. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to, you know, miss some fact checking or something like that in the beginning. But once you get used to kind of what it feels like to fact check news articles and to kind of cross-reference, read the story across different sites, it becomes a lot easier and it becomes kind of like a reflex, like you do it automatically. Use resources to help pop your filter bubble, to fact check sources and articles, and to read more into why and how fake news exists. I'll go over some handy resources in a little bit that you can take with you after this presentation. And as always, when in doubt, ask a librarian for help. You can reach out to me at my email. I also have a contact slide at the very end with my phone number if you prefer calling. I am only at the library 1 day a week, so it'll be not in a great timely manner for me to return your call, but I will try to return your call as best as I can. Email right now is just better. And then you can also reach out to the reference staff at Tredyffrin Township Libraries. The librarians at Tredyffrin Township Libraries are all qualified to help you find accurate and up-to-date information. And of course, it's free. So I wanted to go over some resources. And then if you download the PDF, the links themselves are actually clickable, so it'll take you to the resource itself. The first resource I have listed is called Snopes.com. I'm sure you've heard this. And this is a resource for fact-checking articles and information. So if you come across an article and you don't have the time to search out the other sources, other like leading sources, Snopes can do that for you pretty quickly. And they cover kind of major headlines that are, you know, spreading across different news sources. Read Across the Aisle is a very handy app and Google Chrome extension that helps you step out of your filter bubble. So they'll help you find, you know, center, left-leaning, and right-leaning articles for you, so you don't have to go out and do that searching or that research for yourself. Factcheck.org is an unbiased resource for fact-checking articles and information. I highly recommend checking out the TED Talk about the filter bubble. Authored activist Eli Pariser talks about the bubble and how to step out of it. There is a handy guide called Evaluating Information from the American Library Association. And this is a great resource for learning how to evaluate news. There is a fake news game, and this is a great game where you can test your skills of evaluating news. It's not as easy as you think it is. I remember when it came out a couple of years ago, I gave it a try, and I actually failed a few of the questions or a few of the tests. So it's really great for you to test your skills, and then it also gives you kind of tips on what you did wrong or what you may have missed so that you can look for those things in the future. And finally, recognizing fake news, provided by Colby Sawyer College. This is a great resource for recognizing and avoiding fake news and just understanding fake news as what fake news is. So if you're kind of having a hard time understanding the definition I gave you and the different types of fake news, this is a great resource or a great guide for you to kind of delve deeper into understanding fake news itself. Do we have any questions or comments about any of the resources I mentioned or any of the skills that'll help you kind of evaluate news and to help kind of avoid fake news? I have someone in the chat asking, I'll check the resources, but have you found a reliable, unbiased news source that you could recommend? I'm just going to go back a couple of slides to that, how unbiased is your news source. So we all favor a news source, and that's okay. There's no harm in favoring a news source, like if you favor BBC, ABC, NBC, NPR, that's okay. But just know that unbiased news does not exist. There is no source that is unbiased. So unfortunately, you just kind of have to read, like I mentioned, read across the spectrum. Read something that might be left-leaning, something that may be central, and something that might be right-leaning. If you don't really, you don't have the time or you don't want to put effort into the research, you can read something that's more central. That'll give you kind of more of a, as close as you can get to an unbiased source. I would personally argue that this chart needs to be updated. There are some in the central alignment that definitely lean more left or lean more right. But this is just a great place to get started to try and find a source. You got stuck in a super left-leaning source and you don't want to read it anymore. You can use the all sides chart to try and find one that's a little bit more central. But as I mentioned, there is no unbiased news source. You can't just read from one source anymore. You have to kind of read across the spectrum. We have someone asking about news from other countries like NHK or Sky News. That's a good question. I believe, I'm not sure if all sides, if the bigger chart of all sides includes international news sources. I know it has BBC, but I don't see Sky News on here. It might be included on the All Sides website. There might be like a larger graphic. We also have The Guardian here, which is UK based as well as BBC. So there are some here. You just kind of have to like look for the little logos. I would say there's no harm in reading from an international news source as long as you can confirm that there are no red flags, that it is reputable, it has a mission and vision statement, the authors are credible, the information that they're providing is accurate, and you can find it across other news sources, then I don't see any harm. Personally, I would recommend maybe not just only reading international news, read news relevant to the current country that you're in, but I don't see any harm in reading outside of American news sources. Were there any other questions or comments? Like I mentioned, I know it seems like a lot of, skills to think about when consuming every single piece of news you come across. Um, but like I mentioned, it's like a muscle you have to just exercise every day. Um, and I think personally, and I could be a little bit biased here as I'm a librarian, and I definitely value information and where the information is coming from. But like I said, I would rather have spent the 30 minutes fact checking or reading across different news sources to understand the story in its entirety or to understand the news as it's unfolding than read a 5-minute article or just read the headline and then go and tell my mom or go and tell a friend about, oh, I read this article and spread misinformation. So I think that's why, personally, I think that's why fake news is such a big topic now because people are aiding in that misinformation spread. And it's completely accidental or it's something that, you might not even be aware that you're doing. But if you become a smarter consumer of news, you can stop that aid of spreading misinformation and to help other people kind of understand fact checking and how to access different resources, how to pop your filter bubble and everything like that. Someone recommends, they say I use an app on Android app called Ground. I am not familiar with that app. I'm going to have to give that a look online and see what that's like. But I personally can't recommend. I'm not sure. Um, is it sort of like reading across the aisle where it helps you find different sources, or is it kind of like the all sides? Someone says that they don't see a certain title listed. If the title that you use is not listed, it's probably listed on their website. So I recommend, this is just a very small graphic that I was able to use for the purpose of this presentation. So if you want to see which way your main source leans, you can check it out on allsides.com. Oh, that's great. The app called Ground, it tells you where the story or how the story leans. So it's very similar to All Sides. I'm going to have to check that out. Thank you. As final questions start to come in and we make our way towards the end of our webinar, I do want to make a quick announcement about this program. All of us at the library have been proud and delighted to be able to serve the community in a multitude of ways throughout the pandemic. Virtual programs much like this one, plus electronic materials, reference chat, curbside pickup, and more have kept the community inspired, engaged, and connected. But the pandemic has also caused a loss of revenue at our libraries and has increased many costs. Now it is likely that cuts to services and programs may come. If you can give any amount, we are very grateful for your support. Click the link in the chat to donate today. So do we have any final questions or comments about fake news, how to identify it, and ways that we can kind of avoid it, or ways that we can read across the spectrum or pop our filter bubble? Well, here is my contact information. Here is my email and my phone number. I know I gave you a lot of information tonight in a very short amount of time. Like I said, I do talk quite quickly. So if you have any questions, feel free to follow up, give me a phone call, try to return your call in a timely manner. But I sent out the PDF file of the presentation that you can take with you, and all of the links are clickable, so you can check out the resources that I recommended as a librarian. You can also take a closer look at the images of the filter bubbles and everything like that. But if you have any lingering questions or comments, I'll stick around. Thank you again so much for coming out to learn about fake news, how to identify it, and how to avoid it. I hope you found it somewhat resourceful, and I hope that you can feel more confident in your news consumption as a result of the program.